All right, everybody who's joining us on the Google Hangout, give us just one more minute. It looks like we have 2 people viewing right now. While we're waiting for people to sort of fill in here, do you have that loaded? Yeah, it should load in just a second, I would think. Give us just a second as we get ready to get going here. So you just let me know if you have any problems. Okay, really quickly, for those of you chiming in through the Google Hangout, there's a little grid on the top right of your window. You can click, and there's a little Q&A icon. If you want to post a question through this interface, go ahead and do that there. Otherwise, you can text me at the number on my website. It's jacobRhickman.com, and click on the field school. Anyway. All right, so I think we'll get going. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jacob Hickman. I've met most of you, but not all of you. And we can maybe hang out a little bit afterwards and get to know each other. But essentially, you're all here, hopefully, to learn a little bit about the Southeast Asia Field School, which will be occurring this coming summer. And I do see some people I don't know as well as I know there are at least a couple of people chiming in through the Google Hangout here, which is why you're looking at me. I'll turn this over to some slides in just a minute. But yeah, you get to enjoy me both here and on the screen. It's fantastic, isn't it? All right, so really quick. So I'm Jacob Hickman. I'm assistant professor of anthropology here in our anthropology department. This is Brenda Hickman, my better half and our professional travel agent, more importantly, makes all of our arrangements as we go tromping, backpacking through Southeast Asia. And these little ones are, if you decide to opt into this thing, you'll have to deal with them all summer. So this is little baby Kate. Sorry for you people on the Google Hangout, you can't see my kids, but that'll be an incentive to sign up for the program. And then Thomas and Reed and Will there in the back. So, all right, I'm gonna share my screen here and go through a couple of things. Hopefully this works out just fine. All right, so basically I'm going to kind of give you a bit of an overview of the program, tell you a little bit about what it's like, what the sort of rhyme and rhythm of daily life will actually look like in participating on this program, tell you a little bit about the details, and kind of basically flesh out any information you've gotten from me or other people over multiple emails, I'm guessing, to give you a better sense, as well as to be able to entertain some of your questions if you have any. And so, let's see here. All right, so the program dates, these are maybe slightly flexible, but this is pretty much when it's going to happen. And when I say flexible, it may vary by a couple of days. But we're looking at basically the last week of May to the first week of August. Oops. Well, we'll just have to deal with the chaos on the screen there. And we're going to be spending about half that time in Lao Cai, Vietnam, and half that time in Yunnan in China. Lao Cai is the province in northern Vietnam. Yunnan is the province in China. These two border each other, and I'll give you some more details about that. So one of the things about this field school is it is focused on, or it doesn't, your individual projects do not necessarily have to be focused on, but we will be living in Hmong communities in both of these locations. Hmong is H-M-O-N-G. I'm actually teaching a class next semester on ethno-nationalism in Southeast Asia, where we'll get into all sorts of different interethnic dynamics and so on about Hmong society, as well as other ethnic minority groups and majority groups and the interethnic dynamics between them. But essentially, my research focuses on the Hmong diaspora. In other words, this sort of global migration of Hmong that started in China and kind of has now spread to many different parts of the globe. So really quickly, I want to give you just a couple of words about Hmong history to make that make a little more sense to you in case you don't. Have any of you ever read The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down? Okay, at least one of you. It used to be it was a New York Times bestseller. It's, you know, doesn't get as much play these days. I'm not necessarily recommending it, but, you know, a lot of people have heard. Or, okay, how many of you have seen Gran Torino? Well, at least a couple of you. How many of you don't want to admit that you've seen Gran Torino? Okay, so basically, the Hmong diaspora really started in Southwest China. And when I say diaspora, I'm talking about a global diffusion of this particular group of people, right? So in the 1800s, basically mid-19th century, Hmong started migrating out of Southeast Asia to the Southeast Asian peninsula proper, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. And now, today, you have there are about 5 million Hmong people in the world, is an educated guess. About 1 million of those in Vietnam. Probably close to 3.5 million of those are in China. And then you have hundreds of thousands in Thailand, Laos, the United States, France. So, you know, if you're interested in tracing these people all over the globe like I do, actually in 2016, we're going to be doing a field school in the south of France, chasing down Hmong around places like Nîmes and Lyon. So, you know, stay tuned for that one. But essentially, here's a cool little, what's called a story cloth, which is basically a pictorial representation of this global migration from the perspective of Hmong who have come to the United States. But this is kind of a beautiful representation of how Hmong in the United States kind of imagine their own history. Having been displaced politically from China, then through the Second Indo-Chinese War, what we often refer to as the Vietnam War, in Laos and Vietnam, and then having, you know, come down to Thailand and getting on airplanes to come to the United States. So this is what really started to interest me when I first started meeting Hmong people here in the U.S. were these stories about displacement. You know, mothers narrating about how they had to swim across the Mekong River with 2 kids clinging to their backs, literally as they're being shot at, trying to flee the violence in Laos and get to a place like Thailand where they would live in refugee camps, and eventually some of them find resettlement in places like the United States or France. Hearing these stories really sort of made me think of the world in kind of a fundamentally different way. I'd never heard of Hmong people. I mean, how many of you have heard of Hmong people before you got an email from me or sort of started talking to? Let me ask you this. How many of you have never heard of Hmong people before this started happening? At least one person here. And such was the case before I met Hmong people in Alaska when I first met them. But hearing these stories about this group that doesn't have a country, and the war in Laos, which I knew nothing about. I had no idea that we had a whole secret war going on in Laos that was parallel with the Vietnam War and so on. And so I, you know, decided I wanted to study anthropology and try and sort of get a grasp on making sense of this really interesting stories that these people were telling me. And so what I do in my fieldwork is kind of track down Hmong people, literally chasing down Hmong people all over the globe. we spent a total of about 2 years in Thailand, in a Hmong village in Thailand. Took students to Thailand in 2012 and 2013 to the field site where I did my dissertation field work. And now we're kind of, I've been to all these other places, but I'm trying to do some more established long-term field work, looking at Hmong communities in all these very different places. Because, you know, living in a socialist country is very different from living in Thailand or, you know, inner city Minnesota. There are some things that are actually quite similar as well, but there are some dramatic differences. And so as an anthropologist, some of the things, the questions that I ask and the research that I do really kind of focuses on understanding how people adapt to dramatically different circumstances and how they sort of develop cultural strategies for living in those different places. And you know, a lot of the research that ends up taking place in the field school has something to do with some of those sort of very broad research questions. All right. Okay, so the field school itself, first of all, any questions or thoughts about any of that? Okay. You know, I will say this, the field school doesn't, you know, if you speak Vietnamese or you speak Chinese and you want to do something on sort of rural Vietnamese, or if you're just interested in tourism or economic development or ritual in the abstract, your projects don't necessarily have to focus on Hmong issues per se, although the work that I'm going to be doing, and many of you are going to be working fairly closely with me on my projects, will be kind of Hmong-centric research, if that makes sense. And if you want to have a longer discussion about that, we can talk about it. Okay, so the program itself. So a field school, the reason we call it a field school, not a study abroad, is that a field school really is a research-intensive program. The whole point of this whole program, I mean, you can go do a study abroad in Paris, you can go do, all these really cool programs in cool places where you take, art history classes. Brenda did this actually. And, the Louvre is right there. And it's awesome to be able to like study that stuff and go see it, right? Well, the point of this is not just to study Hmong culture and sort of be there learning about Hmong culture. I mean, that's an important part of it. But the point is actually to get a mentored research experience, right? And not just to do sort of my research, to learn how to do my research as a research assistant, but to actually become a substantive intellectual contributor to that research. In other words, people who participate in this program are going to learn to do quality research. And that can take several forms. One form is to sort of work with me and say, okay, I'm not sure what I'm interested in yet. Let's start talking about some ideas and figure out, maybe I can do a project with you where we sort of work together on something and figure out an interesting research question like, for example, how are Hmong gender dynamics changing as polygyny? In other words, one man who marries multiple women in the same family. How is that changing over time? And how's that changing the way people think about gender relationships? A lot of the questions I ask have to do with new religious rituals and sort of new religious strategies for dealing with new political contexts in which people live, and so on. Another thing I ask is about generational differences. How do the older generation and the younger generation think differently about moral issues? And how do we understand their moral thinking in terms of how Hmong people progress across the life course? I can fill out all those details, but the general point here is that this program is about getting research experience. That is the one thing that's driving everything here is, doing quality research. Now, the upshot of that is that I try to establish an intellectual environment where everybody has a possibility of publishing something coming out of that research. If you're a graduate student, that's expected. If you're an undergraduate, it's not expected. And a lot of undergraduates ask me, can I present at a conference? Can I publish a piece? I mean, I'm just a lowly undergrad. Well, the bottom line is if you do quality work and you have a good idea that it's intellectually defensible, there's absolutely no reason you can't publish it. Publication is about the ideas, not about who you are that's saying them. Yeah.
So the conference that is built into the schedule and in China, are you expecting some of us to
yeah, so the details there, we're still figuring out the finitudes of that. But in the program in Thailand, we were all in the same village the whole time. And about 2/3 of the way through the program, we had our own little mini research conference. And what that did is that forces you to start to present the findings of the data that you're collecting and actually start to develop some coherent understanding of it while you still have time left in the field to plug all the holes in your program, in your project, right? And we're going to do something like that in China, yes. Yeah, Ricky.
Well, you say your own little research conference, you're meeting with professors from my university.
Yeah, we had, so it was a collaborative thing, and this time it'll probably be with Yunnan University, which is in the capital of Yunnan province in Kunming. But yeah, so we had, faculty members from a local university and graduate students presenting their work. We're presenting our work and sort of all having a critical discussion. Everybody's giving each other critical feedback, and with the common goal of sort of, building up our projects and doing better quality research, right? So again, you can see everything here sort of calculated towards giving you a quality grounded research experience and maximizing the chances that you'll actually come out of this with a valuable project and ideally a publishable idea, right? Writing a journal article. The other element to this is that I really try to develop a lab type of atmosphere, and what I mean by that is it's sort of, we have collective intellectual ownership over the stuff that we produce. So the data that is produced out of here, the interviews, the field notes, and so on, those go into a common database. And, generally we're looking at sort of co-authorship between multiple people in the program. And I can get into all those finitudes later on. But basically what that means is this isn't, a lot of anthropology research is just sort of one person by one person going out and doing their project. This is going to be there's an element to that, but it's also going to be a very collaborative type of thing. And in fact, I have 2 years worth of field school data that, in fact, if you have a research question that relates to one of these other projects, I can give you access to that data. So you can actually start doing data analysis right now before you even go to the field, and start sort of working through your idea and figuring out, okay, if this is what I'm looking at, and I know this person 2 years ago did some of these interviews along these lines in Thailand, let's do some comparison and actually start listening to that and doing it, analyzing that. All right, so we all get what a field school is, right? And nobody got up and left the room, so that's a good thing. So as far as the timing goes, so 11 weeks, 6 weeks in each location roughly. This is tentative, but we're basically looking at one sort of trip within each of those 6-week periods. And all of this is contingent on the final number of people we have officially enrolled in the program. Because as you can imagine, when you rent a bus or when you rent a minivan, it's sort of one cost for the whole group, right? It doesn't get cheaper when you have one less person. So some of this is contingent, but the general idea is that we would actually meet in Ho Chi Minh City. Everybody would fly to, you may know as Saigon, right? So everybody would meet in Ho Chi Minh City, everybody would fly in there, and we'll go see some of the sort of Vietnam War history there for a couple of days and kind of work our way up the coastline, you know, maybe hit a nice beach along the way, something like that. A nice beach that's relatively close to some other important Vietnam history. That's critical. And then go to Hanoi, which is the capital of Vietnam. See some of the historical and cultural stuff there. There's a great ethnology museum there. And then we take a train up to that lower red dot just below the border there. That's our first field site. Sapa is the name of the city. Lao Cai is the province, and it's in Vietnam. And I'll show you some pictures of that in a second. But basically, ideally a week of travel through southern Vietnam, 5 weeks of research, hop the border, 5 weeks of research in China, and somewhere in there we would go up to Kunming, have a conference, go visit 1 or 2 other sites. Ideally, we go to this place called Lijiang, which is, it's Lijiang. You Google some photos, you're gonna wanna go there. It's this incredible sort of pre-colonial feeling Chinese city. I mean, you know, cobblestone roads. The old city is sort of marked off from traffic. It's only pedestrian traffic. And you can just wind through these sort of, you know, ceramic tile roof houses forever. It's a beautiful place. And I even went to a Hmong village up around there once, which was pretty cool. I could barely understand each other because the dialect's getting pretty different up there. But anyway, that's the general idea. 5 weeks of solid research in each place, and then 1 week of travel, sort of seeing some of the cultural and historical sites, which are really actually pretty important for helping you understand the larger social context in which these people are living. Because it's important seeing the history of the Vietnam War from the eyes of the victors, right? You know, the whole city was renamed afterwards, right? Instead of Saigon, it's now Ho Chi Minh City. If you don't know who Ho Chi Minh is, you'll learn about that, right? Okay, so as far as those 5 weeks in the actual field site doing field work day in and day out, what does the day actually look like? We do have some class time, but it's relatively little class time compared to actually going out and doing interviews, surveys, you know, talking to people. Essentially, if you don't have any experience with anthropology, basically anthropology is professionalized hanging out, right? And I say that jokingly, but at the same time, it's the reality. Like, you learn to hang out in a way that you're actually trying to learn something substantive about the local life, about the way that these people actually see the world in some way, right? Hanging out at shaman ceremonies, videotaping those, hanging out at, you know, heaven forbid, a big banquet or a big, you know, event where there's a bunch of food and conviviality going on. You know, playing soccer with the kids in the street, or, you know, going out and doing some field work, as in literal field work, you know, planting rice or whatever it may be. You know, chilling with the water buffaloes. These are the types of things that anthropologists do, but we do it in a systematic way that helps us actually understand something about the local life. And each project will dictate what particular type of hanging out or which particular type of data you're going to need to collect. Some of you are going to have to do some standardized surveys to answer your question. Some of you are going to have to spend a lot of time with one particular shaman to really understand sort of that person's you know, take on life, or whatever it is that that you're asking about their cultural reality. Does that make sense? So we will have lectures, typically maybe 3 hours one day and maybe like 2 or 3 hours another day of the week, where we're talking about research design, how you do good ethnographic field research, and the rest of the time is really spent sort of going out and doing this stuff. All right. Anything to chime in, Brenda? I'm just kind of going off my notes here. Any questions at this point? And by the way, you people there on the Google Hangout, I know this is probably boring because it's all been pictured, but if you have any questions, please let us know through text or whatever. Please.
So with the UX research, said something that isn't specifically set up so it's all a 5-week chunk of research and sightseeing and other stuff.
So the general schedule would be, we meet in Saigon, we do that travel together for a week-ish, and we end up in the field site just because of the geography, the way it plays out. And then 5 weeks of field work, we cross the border, we might see a thing, but we're basically going straight to our new field site, which is gonna feel a lot like travel initially because you're going to a completely new place, right? The idea here is that we're studying two Hmong communities in relative proximity to one another that are really in dramatically different places, right? These are dramatically different. You can't, just because they're both socialist countries or whatever, it does not mean that these people are living in the same type of context. It really is two dramatically different places. And what this means is that it's a nice setting for asking some comparative questions about how people adapt to these different, or how they react to these different circumstances in different ways. But then, okay, so roughly 1 week of travel. Again, this is contingent on how many people sign up and so on in the end. But 1 week of travel, 5 weeks of fieldwork on the Vietnam side in Lao Cai, cross the border. We'd probably do about 3 weeks of fieldwork, then go up to Kunming, have a little conference, sort of workshop our ideas, figure out where the holes are, visit 1 or 2 other places, then come back for about a week and a half, finalizing your projects. So that's the rough schedule, essentially. Does that make sense? And then we would end where, the only travel we would collectively do as a group, in other words, the travel that would be covered by the program, would be within Yunnan province itself. You want to go see Beijing or Shanghai or whatnot, I strongly encourage you to do that, but that's on your own dime afterwards, if that makes sense. So, okay. So let's see here. As far as the cost goes, so we're basically looking at roughly $6,000. This is inclusive of tuition, living expenses, and what I mean by that is we're basically living in hotels the entire time. When I do this in Thailand, we live with host families, and for a variety of reasons, that's just politically more complicated in Vietnam and China, and so the path of least resistance here is basically to stay in hotels. We're going to be staying in hotels in real close proximity to the places where we're working. So on the Vietnam side, you're going to be, there's going to be Hmong people all over the town center itself that you could interview, and actually ones that speak really good English, it turns out. And also the villages are all kind of, there are villages as close as a 5-minute walk, and as far as you want to walk beyond that as well. There are probably about 5 or 6 villages within a 30-minute walk of the hotel we're going to be staying in. And I'll show you some pictures of those in just a minute. But that includes basically a full semester's worth of credit. That includes the hotel, for the duration of the program. It includes 2 meals a day, typically breakfast and dinner. You're on your own for lunch, but food's a lot cheaper there than it is here. I can get into those specifics if you'd like. That is also depending on the final number of participants and some grants that I've applied for. So sorry? It includes their visas. We're going to process the visas all together. So that includes, you have to provide your passport. You have to pay for your passport. If you don't have one and you're planning on coming, you need to get one as soon as possible. But we will process the visas together, and that's actually pretty expensive in China. Actually, it's several $100s. So that's included in the cost, the program cost, right? Yeah. Oh yeah. Let's see. Is that cost for non-BYU students also? Bottom line, basically yes. You may come, it gets to be a little bit complicated. It's actually not whether or not you're a BYU student, but because BYU is sponsored by the LDS Church, it's whether, I just read the question, is that the cost for the non-BYU students as well? Sorry. Anyway, bottom line, you may, there will be the option, so if, it gets complicated, and it basically depends on your particular circumstances. But the bottom line is that $6,000 is a rough but pretty close estimate of the total cost when you factor in tuition and living expenses. But you know, was it Cody? In answer to your question, yeah, you can pretty much plan on that. Again, if we get more people enrolled, that cost may come down. If I get one of these big grants that I've applied for, the cost may come down and so on. And I may have some of the grants that I've applied for specific to particular types of projects, so I may be able to, you know, help if you're working on a particular project. I may have some additional money I could, you know, help offset your costs. And by the way, all of this, if you have, so if you're at another university and you have, you know, Pell Grants and stuff like that. So, you know, the tuition expenses, those are legitimate educational expenses that some of that stuff can cover for those of you out there in YouTube land. So, but basically, you know, when it gets down to the specifics, we just need to talk about your situation. Sometimes there's sort of an interinstitutional agreement that we need to sign that certifies to your institution that your financial aid there can cover tuition here, which is transferable back and so on. It gets kind of complicated, and that's why it's so individualized to your particular situation. But bottom line, you can pretty much plan on $6,000 or less being the ballpark figure we're talking about here. Hopefully I get a bunch of grants and we get 15 people and that comes dramatically down. That's a possibility, but you know, the devil's in the details, as it were, right? Any other questions about that, about cost? So, you know, keep in mind that this is 3 months. If you're considering a full semester's worth of tuition and 3 months of living expenses, you know, food, utilities, and rent. The one major thing this does not include, by the way, is your ticket to and from Southeast Asia. And you're looking at neighborhood of, Brenda, when you ran those numbers, what was it like? Flying into Saigon and out of Kunming is like $1,300? Yeah. So you're covering your own plane ticket. We're not booking plane tickets for you or anything. We will process your visas and get all the visas in order because we have to do that as a group because of the educational nature of this program. But outside of that, you're providing your own plane ticket. So $6,000, that's the living expenses, the group travel that we do. So, you know, all the buses and hotels and tours that we go on as a group from Saigon to Lijiang and everywhere in between. That's covering all of that. It's covering some travel expenses for in-country professors who are going to be working with you on your project, so we get some sort of collective mentoring. It's going to pay for research assistance. We will provide interpreters for you. The other side of that is I am teaching an introduction to Hmong language class, which if you're a BYU student, this is a required. We can set up some sort of Skype or Google Hangout for those coming from other places. I'm not going to require you to take it for tuition because that gets really expensive there. But and the reason I'm requiring it is because last time I did this program in Thailand, it was optional. Most of the students took it, and the students that took it, I mean, from taking the introductory class and spending 3 months in the summer working with Hmong people day in and day out, I was really impressed with the extent to which they were actually able to navigate interactions. 2 of our students actually went out and without an interpreter did a 30-house survey themselves. Now, we helped them set it up and translate the questions initially, but they recorded it, went out and collected their data without any of our native speakers or fluent, you know, second language speakers or anything, and they were able to manage their way through that. So that really is a critical element, the introductory language class, and that's listed in the class schedule already. It's a FLANG 100R class, and the section headings should say Hmong, Introduction to Hmong. So I think it's Tuesday, Thursday, 4 to 5, I think. Okay. While we're on prerequisites, if you're an anthropology major, 442 is a prerequisite. Okay, and that's being offered next semester. That's our pre-field research design class. If you're not an anthro major and you're looking for an interesting class next semester, I'd highly recommend it. It teaches basically general social science research design, and the main assignment in the class is to actually design a proposal for a research study. So that would be the project that you plan to pursue, right? So it's another structure within which you can develop your research training and develop the quality of your project. Yeah. So, okay, I think we've covered all the cost issues. Any other questions on cost? Yeah.
What's like the time, like what date will you have all this?
So the Kennedy Center does all the billing on this, and they basically, what they do is they try and stage it out, I think, over the winter and spring semester. So the tuition part of it is actually due when tuition is due for spring and summer. But the program fee, so that anything you pay above tuition, that's due in installments through the course of winter semester. And they actually manage that. I don't actually touch that side of it. I do the academic thing. That's one of the reasons the Kennedy Center is here, is to manage that. But they'll start, you know, once you're officially accepted into the program, they will start billing your student account in installments. I think they might be like $500 installments or something like that. Ricky. Oh, is that cost? Oh, sorry. Is there any special dialect that we should choose choose to learn from outside sources? Yeah, so let's see, Cody, I think you're at DeKalb. If you were to take the Hmong language class at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, that's the same dialect we're doing. So I speak White Hmong is the dialect that I've learned and work in. Green Hmong will also be fairly present, and in fact in Wenshan, White Hmong is the minority, but there's a cluster of White Hmong villages that we're going to be focusing on. And that's the linguistic resources for everybody in the program. The dialect that we're teaching is all going to be White Hmong, and the communities we're going to be focused on are White Hmong. That being said, there are many other speakers of other dialects readily available for interviewing and involvement in your research. So I hope that answers your question, Cody. All right, but yeah, if you take Hmong language, the only places that I know of that teach it are University of Minnesota does occasionally. I don't think they do right now. I think it's just University of Wisconsin-Madison. And they have a summer program as well. You know, if you're looking to do Hmong language training beyond this, you can do the first year with us and then go do the CIASI program at Wisconsin, do a second or third year even, if you want to pursue that language for graduate study or whatnot. And then some of the schools in California offer Hmong as well, but they'll also teach White Hmong, which is, again, the dialect we're dealing with here. All right. So, you know, final point on cost, again, you know, if you compare the fact that this is 3 months worth of basically complete living expenses and all the support for the program and group travel, we really do try to keep the budget as trim as possible. And I do think it is fairly competitive, even with regards to, I mean, at some of the state schools like Minnesota, for example, you're paying $4,500 just in tuition for a semester. So I do think it is a fairly competitively priced program, and we try to offer as much as we can within that. All right. So going back to Cody's question, just curious, is anybody in this room not LDS? Okay. We can get it. So the distinction is not in-state, out-of-state, BYU, not BYU, but there is a tuition difference in whether you're LDS or not LDS. And that's sort of the wild card here. But even within those constraints, we basically try and keep the total cost, tuition plus living expenses, in the same ballpark. But you know, it's all about individual circumstances, and we can talk about that. Basically, contact me and we'll have a conversation about it. Okay. Yeah, he's at Eastern Illinois. All right. All right, so let me show you some pictures. Is that okay? Where are we at here? Okay. So again, you know, so this is just the very bottom southwestern part of China, obviously. The field site in Thailand where we were. So if you go on my website, we have a bunch of pictures from the 2012 field site. Have you all been on my website at some point? I think I sent out the URL with all those emails. You can click through those pictures on the field school page. Those are all from the 2012. In the 2012 program, we actually went to northern Vietnam for our trip in the middle of the program. And so there are some pictures of northern Vietnam that you'll see there. But the place, this community in Sapa, the town center itself is kind of like a little touristy outpost. I mean, the place itself was a French colonial outpost in the middle of this incredibly rural area. And it's come to be a major center for cultural tourism, essentially. So in the town center itself, where our hotel is, you know, there's going to be all sorts of backpackers, Vietnamese tourists, and so on, and people come there essentially for culture. It's kind of this interesting little thing. And it's situated in this big, you know, big long valley, just chock full of these Hmong and Mien villages, and some other, and also some Thai villages as well. But Hmong are by far the ethnic majority in this particular region. And, you know, as mountainous and steep and beautiful the terrain is, you know, they cultivate these rice terraces just about everywhere. It creates this sort of really beautiful geometric aesthetic. It really is a serene place to be. You know, one of the reasons that we really wanted to go back there and spend a summer doing research. Any thoughts about the natural beauty of Sapa, honey?
Well, Sapa is just nice because you aren't going to have like culture shock like badly, because you kind of feel like you're in like a little resort town in Europe or something. Like it's fantastic. There's so many things to English. There's good food, hot showers.
Yeah.
It's not often yet like we did in Thailand.
So yeah, and I'll show you a picture of the hotel that we will in all likelihood be staying in. So for example, take this guy. So this is a Hmong tour guide. And one of the interesting things about Sapa is you have people, you have a preponderance of people, in fact, who have never had a single day of formal education and yet speak impeccable English. People that if you were talking to them on the phone, you would think they were Australian because they're speaking English with such a distinct Australian accent. And they basically learn it on the street. And they learn it on the street for the purpose of engaging with this growing commerce of tourism. So there's a lot of interesting things, and we can get into the specifics in individual meetings. But it's a very interesting place, this sort of juxtaposition of rural mountainous farming villages versus what really in just the past 15 years has grown up to be this monstrous cultural tourism phenomenon within the community. It creates this interesting dynamic. It also means that we'll have a lot of resources for interpreters as you go out and do your interviews with the older folks or a lot of the people back home who don't come into the city to do the tourism thing. Right? But he speaks incredible English. Any one of you could, you know, take him tomorrow and go interview a shaman and, you know, get the data that you need to get for your project. So there's even so this is an indigenous nonprofit organization started by a Hmong woman to do, basically engage with developmental and economic development and education initiatives for Hmong in the community. One of the interesting things here is that the Vietnamese people or the Vietnamese shop owners are sort of reaping the major economic benefit from this influx of money, and Hmong people are sort of the attraction. It's this, you know, there's a whole bunch of interesting research questions that one could engage in within this particular community. It's just a beautiful place. If you've seen pictures of Hmong people, if you've been to a Hmong New Year's, you'll realize that the dress is quite distinct. Most of the people, this is gradually changing. There's something in generational shift, but most of the older folks still wear traditional Hmong clothes every day. The younger generation is kind of off and on. Still, though, the younger generation, I would say, you know, maybe 50% of the time, you know, wears traditional Hmong clothes, and they make these by hand. These are hand-woven hemp clothes dyed in locally grown indigo. Anyway. So this is the lobby of the hotel that we'll likely be renting out. Well, I think we're, again, this depends on our final enrollment numbers, but we'll probably rent out the entire hotel. If we have about 10 to 15 students, which is what we're shooting for, this lobby space will basically be our collective lecture/movie watching space. So we actually bring a hard drive with our entire, I shouldn't say this because this is being broadcast on YouTube, but we have our entire collection of movies. So if you're starting to get the culture shock, you can kick back and watch some Southeast Asian documentaries. That's what you can do. And actually, I do have, one of the favorites was this 9-part PBS series on the history of the Vietnam War, which is actually very well done and very informative and just good all around. But, this is one of the bedrooms in that hotel. You can see this is not roughing it by any stretch of the imagination. Some of the bedrooms in the village in Thailand were like this. Most were not. In fact, you can see pictures of what those. You can see pictures of what some of those accommodations look like on my website. There's a picture. You might wonder why there's a random cement room with a mattress on the floor. That was one of the rooms that. In fact, that was the room that Ricky stayed in fact, wasn't it? Yeah. So anyway, I guess it's a little bit dark here, but somebody can turn the light off if you want to see these more clearly. But anyway. So when it comes to food, it's also not roughing it. The food in Vietnam and China, both places, very different, but it's just, I love Southeast Asia, and being an anthropologist is a good reason to get me there, but it's just an awesome place really just to hang out, let alone, do some cool work. So this is, okay, so those were a couple of pictures from Vietnam. This is this sort of cluster of Hmong villages in China. So in China, we're going to be living in Wenshan, which now to describe that place, it's actually a really big city. I mean, if you look at a map of China, if I were to go back to the map, I won't, but you see all these little sort of specks on the map, and this is really what even today, people who have never been to this part of China, imagine it to be sort of the people in Beijing or Shanghai. They kind of imagine this to be like the backwards Appalachia, wild, wild west type of part of China. And yet, the place we're going to be staying is a humongous city with, millions of people and brand new developments with, pictures, when they do a big new complex, they show you pictures in the fence to make it look like what type of shopping. I mean, I'm talking like Gucci signs, and who knows whether there'll be a Gucci store there. But I mean, there's economic development with a vengeance going on in this community. It is a massive urban space. The Hmong villages themselves are all kind of like the ones we're going to be working in, maybe 20 kilometers just outside the city. And the reason for that is there's no guest house in the village itself, and we have to stay at official hotels for various reasons. But so we're going to be living in hotels in the city. There's a huge Hmong population in the city itself, but the villages we're going to be traveling to, and we'll basically have a van taking us there, in the morning, coming back in the late afternoon, evening, and so on, about 20 kilometers away. And this is one of those villages. It's a cluster of about 5 white Hmong villages, white Hmong being the dialect that's spoken. That's the same dialect I'm teaching and that I speak and do my research in. Again, the food in China is amazing. This is a white Hmong village, not the one we're going to be working on, but you can see sort of the dress is really quite distinct from the other pictures I just showed you where they had the hemp, indigo dyed clothes and so on. And there's some interesting research out there about, different types of dress and the symbolic meaning when it comes to Hmong identity and so on. It's a market, some kids playing. A lot of the houses around China are this sort of, adobe type of construction. Oops. Yeah, I'll just kind of cycle through these. Religious ritual iconography is a very interesting topic of investigation. Understanding how all these different things on the mantle, the lintel, and everything, the ritual significance of that, the ancestral rituals that go along with it. Some of my research sort of reaches into that. And there's a lot of interesting stuff we could say about that. I'll spare you at the moment. So yeah, the point here was to give you sort of a sense of what the program looks like, some of the things that you'd be doing there, to give you a sense of sort of imagining what it would be like to engage in this program. And again, the end goal in sight here is to give you a quality, grounded research experience, and to set up a context where we can sort of do collaborative research and potentially have some publications that come out of that. I will say about our 2013 field school, we had a number of fantastic projects that we were all collaborating on. We have at least 3 papers that are in various stages of 2 of which are getting pretty close to submitting for publication. Students from that program have presented their research at the Hmong Studies Conference in the University of Minnesota. They presented it at the American Anthropological Association meetings, which is the International Anthropology Conference here in the United States. They presented that at the undergraduate conference the Utah Conference for Undergraduate Research, which is a local undergraduate conference. But they've also, so they presented anywhere from local research conferences to the, the biggest, most international conferences that anthropologists present at. And that work, will soon be getting published. So the point is that our aim is to do quality research and to really have an incredibly enjoyable time along the way. So with that, we can basically spend as much time or as little time as you want answering questions, including you 4 viewers out there. And so Ricky was with us last summer. I don't know, Ricky, do you have anything you want to chime in and say about any of this?
I want to go. It's a great program. It's a lot of fun, and it opens up so many doors. It's already opened up a lot of doors. There's not really any other programs that you can go to where you get the data essentially published from the program. It's really cool.
I will say that, I've only been doing this, I've only done this 2 summers so far. In 2012, 2013, we took the last summer off as far as field schools go. One of my colleagues, John Hawkins, who just retired, has done this for 20 years consecutively, but also, he'd basically been doing this entire career. He's on, I think, his 4th volume of an edited volume of undergraduate papers that are published through University of Oklahoma Press. He went the edited volume route where he basically heavily edited these student papers, put them into volumes on particular topics, and those have all been published. Like I say, I think he's on his 5th volume, and 3 are already out. 1 is in press. The other 5th one is getting close. I tend to focus with my students more on thinking about journal articles, finding the right outlet for publishing that particular idea and really getting it to a point where it's rigorous enough that there's no reason that it couldn't be published in that particular journal. And that's kind of the, again, the end in sight here. So. Other questions?
What about the IRB?
Okay, so Grant Owens, how will IRB approval work? Basically, I will have, let's see, will I have to go through my school's IRB if I want to present, publish, etc., any research? How many of you know what an IRB is? How many of you don't know what an IRB is? Okay. Bottom line, so I have an active IRB protocol through BYU that covers this research. And once we know who's participating in the scope of the projects, we will submit an amendment for that to get it approved. But essentially, an IRB is an institutional review board. There's federal legislation that any federally funded research has to go through this review process to make sure that we're not doing unethical things, like injecting people with strange things and killing them, or frankly, a lot of these regulations are built more around biomedical research, but anybody doing research with human subjects, as it's framed, has to go through this process. If you're federally funded, most universities choose to apply that model across the board, whether or not you have federal funding, such is the case at BYU. But I have an actively approved that has been approved for 2 years and it's been renewed every year. Protocol that covers the research. So in general, we would sort of take the research questions you're asking, incorporate them as an amendment into our current IRB protocol, and you would not have to go through this entire bureaucratic process yourself, if that makes sense. I hope that answers your question, Grant. Yeah?
So in terms of flights, in the past, I've gone to BYU, travel, and sort of realizing that that's not happening.
So the question is about arranging flights. Yeah, so some programs book the flights as a group and they'll leave and come back as a group. We don't, and the big reason there is chances are if we do them individually, because some of you are going to be flying from various places, right? Not everybody's flying from Salt Lake. So I basically tell you when you need to be in Saigon and you buy a ticket that gets you there in time, is the general idea. You can still go through BYU. You can anybody who gets accepted into the program can go through BYU Travel, and they get the corporate rates and everything for those flights. Oftentimes they can, shave 5, 10, maybe even probably 10% off the price and so on. So I usually find the cheapest ticket I can possibly find through Kayak, Expedia, whatnot. Then I call BYU to see if they can even beat that, right? But no, so you book your flight on your own. I tell you when we're gonna meet in Saigon. Some people get there a day earlier or whatnot and backpack around. Some people go a couple weeks earlier, backpack around southern Vietnam or Cambodia or Thailand or something, and then meet up in Saigon, right? But I tell you when we're gonna meet as a group and start doing group stuff where we start covering your hotel, you know, and all that stuff that I've described, and group travel. And then we travel up until probably around August 9th. You're done, and you know, I might buy your ticket back to your bus ticket back to Kunming. From there, you're on your own, whether you fly right back to the U.S. or go backpack China or whatnot. Right? Yeah.
So I'm already kind of looking, and I've seen some stuff where it's like if you buy it within this amount of days, it's like this much cheaper. So like, I know when will we know what to compare eventually start on?
So the question for you, for those of you on the Google Hangout, when should you actually start buying a ticket? I mean, we're gonna buy our tickets probably what, Brenda, like late January. Once I know that I have the critical mass of students, I'm gonna buy my ticket and sort of lock in, and I'll let you know. You know, we've extended the deadline, by the way, to December 31st. That doesn't mean wait until December 30th to apply, because some of the stuff you actually have to send to the Kennedy Center for it to go onto your application. But I realize it's getting close enough to the December 15th deadline where some of you might not have those completed. So we've extended the deadline to the December 31st. But basically within that first week of January, I'm hoping to have a solid idea on who's coming, right? Which would give you enough information to say, okay, I'm gonna go buy a ticket, right? So, you know, right now it's still so far out that nobody could guess whether the tickets would go up or down at this point. When it gets really close to the time, it's pretty sure that the prices are going up. But at this point, you know, it could go either way. Ricky.
I talked to the BYU travel office last week. They said that typically the cheapest international flights for summertime come in early February. So that can go up or down with gas prices.
Yeah.
Gas prices are pretty low right now, but best bet is that either way, best price.
Yeah.
So if you're buying this far out, then that means that you're really desperate to go, like you're setting it. So
Yeah. So.
When it gets closer to, like, we'll all get together and like kind of see who wants to travel when, and hopefully get people to kind of travel and see flights together. If you don't want some person who's never gone international before
Yeah.
go by themselves. So like, don't be scared about like that part. We'll definitely talk about.
Yeah, so you know, I will consult with you on buying your ticket, but I'm not going to take your money and buy it for you. That's what I'm saying, right? And, you know, just because that with everybody coming from different places, it's just too much of a mess, you know, you can do that. And if you've never flown international, and we had this 2 years ago, I think there might be somebody here who had never flown international before. But, you know, we basically set up, okay, you know, two or three groups of 2 or 3. One group was even 4 students, I think. They just got together, they figured out the cheapest ticket that worked for all their schedules, and they all bought the same ticket, so they were actually on the same flights and, you know, making sure they didn't get lost in the South Korean airport or whatever, right?
And like, even if they were flying from Salt Lake, they might be in San Francisco,
Yeah.
or like a nice.
And that was, yeah. So a lot of them actually made sure they left the same flight from LA to Taipei at the same time, but they flew from different places to LA or whatever. Ricky. Oh, there's another question on here. Okay, how and when does analyzing the research work happen? If I'm interested in doing research for a senior thesis, would I conduct my research this summer and analyze the data with faculty from my home institution? And I think this is a separate question. So we will, the training that I give you in the field will cover some modes of data analysis. And you will be required to do some data analysis as you're collecting the data. One of the reasons for that is that as you start to analyze your data, you realize some of the deficiencies in the way you collected it. Ricky's nodding his head and laughing right now. But once you start to sort of see the patterns in your data, that actually feeds back into the way that you're collecting data. So we will be talking about that dialectic process of data collection and analysis. That being said, we will be spending, because we put the resources in to be there in the field, we're not going to be spending 12 hours a day analyzing data in the hotel room. That would be kind of a waste, right? When you're there in a field site and able to collect field work. That being said, again, it's worth spending some time, and we will discuss principles of data analysis. For BYU students, we have actually an entire post-field data analysis course that you can take. I'm not teaching that course in the fall, so I can't say I would let you Skype into that or something. If you're interested in getting some explicit training, one thing I would actually recommend if you're really serious about this and you're headed towards graduate school, or you're a graduate student, you don't have a sort of ethnographic data analysis course of this type at your institution, I think it's the University of Florida actually offers an online version of the course. It's fairly similar to my data analysis course. In fact, I kind of modeled it off for a workshop that I took from that member of the faculty at Florida. So, we can talk about the specifics there. I'm happy to mentor you in that process, even outside of an official course framework, because again, the atmosphere that I'm trying to establish here is a sort of lab atmosphere. And again, what I mean by that, not that we have a physical laboratory, but it's socially kind of like a lab, right? We're collectively collecting data together, collectively collecting data. We're working together. We have sort of mutual intellectual property rights over the stuff that you collect, and we're working on it towards publications. So, the general answer to that question is, I'm committed to this data, and I'm committed to not just collecting this data and forgetting about it, but actually developing a rigorous analysis of that contributes something to our social scientific understanding of these questions that we invest so much in asking, right? So I plan to work with anybody who has the drive to make a significant contribution in pushing those ideas for us and developing it and putting the time and effort into writing an analysis. I'm going to work with you, and we're going to get some co-publications out of this, right? So that's the sort of general answer there. And Austin, maybe you can help me make sure I get these. Yeah, so as far as the references go, do we need to fill out that sheet? And then, okay, so this is with regards to the letter of recommendations. I'm sorry if you actually went through the more arduous process. I've been trying to work with the Kennedy Center. Bottom line, their database needs to be fixed in several ways. You don't have to get a full-blown letter of recommendation. What you can do is basically, I mean, it's great that some of you have already done that, but what you can do is just give me the contact information for your references, and if you'll email those to isp@byu.edu. I actually just updated the website today to include this, so that field website, because we actually is kind of a runaround to figure out what the workaround would be. But you can actually email those contact information directly to the ISP office, and they have to actually upload it to your application. There's nothing you can do to sort of check that box off your application other than emailing 2 sets of contact information to the ISP office. ISP stands for International Study Programs. That's a subset of the Kennedy Center for International Studies. So if you do that now, if you've already done recommendations, that means that I probably won't have to contact those references. And depending on how well I know you, I mean, if I've never met you before, I'm probably going to be calling your references just to get a sense of, how you might perform in the program and so on. But yeah, so I hope that answers that question. So you don't need to do you don't need to have somebody spend a bunch of time doing a letter of recommendation per se. If you've already done that, just fax it to the number following the instructions on there and get it submitted. But as an alternative to that, you can just send name, email, and phone number of a person, 2 people actually, and they will upload those to those things, and they will basically fulfill that part of your application once you email them the right information. Does that make sense? Okay. And that would take care of that part of it. Did I get all of that question, Austin? Okay. Are there any other questions that I've missed from the Google Hangout? I don't think so. Okay. There was a hand somewhere. Ricky, did you have something?
Well, I was saying that
yeah. They've been trying to turn around within a day or so. So, yeah.
So I'm going to have a few people already come
Usually it's me running away from the students, so I can get some writing time actually, but Austin. Oh yeah, so there is a prep class, and if you're not a BYU, if you're a BYU student, you have to take that, right? In other words, if you're taking classes next semester, the semester that starts in January, you need to register for that class. You can't register it until you're accepted into the program, which means you need to finish your application so I can accept you, so that then you can, it might even be automatic. I'm not sure about that. In fact, Mary, it's not, you still have to add it? Okay. But I'm pretty sure you can't register for it. And it's, the class is an IAS 396, sorry? It's, I can look it up here, but I'll pull this up real quick and see if we can. When did you check last? It's showing up from my end of the system, but it's not a 200 class. It's actually, I was a bit surprised by the number. 369, and it says Hickman is the, so this is the thing, it's a second block class. So if you're looking for the whole semester, you wouldn't find it, or if you're looking for the first block, you wouldn't find it. It's second block. That makes sense? Yeah, it's 6 to 8 on Wednesdays, second block only. So it starts mid-semester. Those of you who are at another institution, you will be required to Skype into those, but you don't have to take it for credit per se. And the reason is that it's just, you know, really another cost. But the prep class is less of a class and us collectively figuring out the logistics of making sure we all show up in the same place, in the same country, prepared to do research. So there is some sort of workshopping of the logistics of what we have to do to make sure we're ready to hit the ground running when we get to Vietnam. But there's no real coursework per se, right? So it's not a load other than the time you have to put into it and the stuff you would have to do to get ready to go to Vietnam anyway, if that makes sense. But there is some paperwork and so on to get your student health insurance taken care of, and so on. And just real quick, for those of you who are not BYU students, just to be clear, you're registered as BYU students for the duration of this program. So during that summer, you're actually getting BYU credit as a BYU student. And then, you know, as far as transferring that to your home institution, we've had success in the past. You know, you have to talk to your home institution to see if that's a possibility in your home department and so on. But yeah, that's the idea, is that the credit hopefully would be transferable back to your program. But that's something to check on now, actually. And we can offer graduate credit, we can offer undergraduate credit, and there's a little bit of flexibility. Usually it's some sort of research design class or fieldwork class or something like that, and then a substantive readings class. I won't get into that, but one of the courses you take is less lecture and more sort of you reading literature that builds up your project. And the product that you produce for your grade is an annotated bibliography of that literature that, you know, builds on your project. Again, even the coursework that's not explicitly research driven is designed to push your research forward. I hope it's clear that that's the thrust of this program, right? That everything is sort of calculated towards that end. Yeah, so that'll be 6 to 8 Mountain Standard Time, second block of next semester, which is, I don't know, something like 26th of February to the end of the semester. What was your name real quick?
Garen.
Garen, did we talk?
We have.
Okay. Yeah. If you're interested in getting more info, just drop me a line.
I will. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I'm an international relations
Okay.
major, and I was wondering if it's okay if the research project that we want to do is more focused towards that part.
Absolutely, yeah. So it doesn't, and I should have been more clear on that, it doesn't have to be an anthropology project. My argument is that anthropology is actually the most interdisciplinary of social sciences. I mean, we study humanity. If it has to do with humans, there's an anthropologist somewhere that cares about it, right? So I mean, unless you're a biologist, well, okay, no, sorry, even biology. Unless you're a geologist and you're doing something that has nothing to do with archaeology, maybe then we don't have much to say about it. But so yeah, I mean, the idea is that I provide a context where you can sort of hit the ground running. In fact, I mean, Ricky's actually coming from international relations. Yeah, I mean, and I've collaborated in 2012. I did a collaborative project with a political science professor and one of his students, Joel Selway. We actually did a field experiment, an economic game, where we did some social networking data through sort of survey, and we actually played an economic game to see how the incentive structures played out and so on. So, actually, my degree isn't even explicitly in anthropology. It's in comparative human development, which is basically psychological anthropology is what I studied in my PhD program. But I have a very strong interdisciplinary background, and I care about cross-disciplinary, transgressing disciplinary boundaries. So you don't have to be an anthropology student. We have, I don't know, is it urban planning? Is that sort of the way to frame what you do? I mean, you're going to be doing some sort of urban planning type of research and so on. And so, the idea is that, I mean, it needs to be something that's feasibly studyable within the communities that we're working in. But generally, I haven't found a case yet where I couldn't take a student's degree of interest and sort of find something of local interest to that. Find some phenomenon that's relevant to that interest. If that makes sense, Ricky.
I'd also say IR school pretty long.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, one of the grants that I've applied for is to bring Eric Heyer, who's one of our political science faculty, the director of the Asian Studies program here, to bring him to China while we're in China and to work with you sort of collectively mentoring your research projects and to give some lectures on the broader political and social context in China. Because it's really critical. You can't just study, we're studying these Hmong communities, but at the same time, it's just as critical to understand the broader social context in which these people are living, right? So yeah, there's going to be a very strong interdisciplinary dimension to the program. And we're pretty good about accommodating research interests coming from any angle and finding something that really is interesting with regards to what your particular research trajectory looks like. So. Anything else? Yeah.
I know we talked about this over the last couple of times, I just want to ask again because I kind of get some
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Working on getting time off from work if we go, but we can't get full time off those days. So because of probably not being near an airport or something like that, probably guessing.
Yeah, so let's, I'm going to suspend your question for just a second because when we finish this sort of broadcasting, we'll talk about people with spouse issues. Not that having a spouse is an issue. Brenda would probably disagree with me on that. Having a spouse is probably the biggest burden in her life. But we'll talk about some of those specifics once we sort of address general questions, if that's okay. Do you have time to stick around?
Yeah,
okay.
that's fine.
Yeah, so because I have some specific things to say about those logistics, because you probably don't want to be sharing a hotel room with another single student, right? So anyway, yeah, we'll talk about those logistics in a minute. Are there any other questions prior to that?
I know I asked you about this
Yeah.
before, but can you talk a little bit about what classes you're going to be offering and like what that will count
Okay.
for within the anthropology minor?
So the question for those of you on YouTube, what courses are